Here we'll be looking at a Teac model A4010SL open reel tape recorder. It's been sitting around for quite some time. I'm sure we're going to need some reconditioning done here. First of all, the wood housing is excellent condition. Front panel, everything's in excellent condition. It does have issues though, of course. Turning the hubs, I can feel that the hub brakes are operational. The capstan does turn. The right tape tensioner is working. All the controls are loose and appear clean. Switches seem clean. Here are the issues though. The left tape tensioner is completely frozen. So that'll have to be internally looked at. Also, and this is something that always seems to fail on these open reel decks, the pinch roller on its mechanism is completely frozen. It spins on its bearing, but it's completely frozen. Lubrication points are going to have to be internally looked at and reconditioned, but we'll get to that in a little bit. And I'm not going to put any power to it until we get some of those issues taken care of. And we'll slowly bring power up with some of the test equipment that we'll show in a few minutes. Now we have to start to do our reconditioning. We're going to have to take some of the covers off, and to start with the back cover, obviously, because sometimes this can get a little tedious. And internally, it looks quite good. Nothing seems to have been modified in any form or fashion. I think we're going to have some pretty good luck with this guy. Most, if not all, of the mechanics for the deck are under the front panel, and so we need to disassemble the front panel. Nice thing, the pinch roller just pulls right off. It's sitting on its own bearing, and that just pulls right off. There's nothing retaining it whatsoever. And of course we have to remove, there's 4 front panel retaining screws, so we have to remove those. And there's a cap, kind of a decorative cap that goes over the capstan bearing, and that comes off. There's only one screw holding the top of the head cover, and then that just comes right off. Looking at the heads now after the cover came off, and the heads are in very good condition. I don't see any appreciable wear whatsoever on these heads. We'll probably get some cleaning after we're done with everything, but up and above that, looks like we're in pretty good shape here. The left tension arm, which is going to obviously require some work internally, comes off with only one Phillips screw, and there's a couple little sub-assemblies here. That comes off without too much trouble. Now you have to take these rubber platter covers off, and on mine they were stuck on there really well, so I had to, at first I thought I wasn't going to be able to get them off without damaging them, but I actually did. They're down into, they seat down inside the rim of the platter, so they're a little difficult to get off, but you a little prying and persuasion, they come off. Now when you put them back on, you'll notice there's a hole right here in the platter. There's also on this rubber part, the cover, there's a little nub. When you put this back together, just make sure that little nub is down in that hole. Otherwise, you'll have this all kinds of problems with it not fitting correctly. So just make sure that little nub goes back in that hole. And now, of course, we have to take the 3 screws, of course, 3 on each platter to get these platters off. Once the rubber cover's off, the platter cover's off with the 3 screws. There's 2 more screws now that hold the front cover down to the face, and these 2 screws need to be removed as well. Now with all that hardware removed, the front panel can be removed. Now this takes a little bit of jacking around because there's a plastic piece here that's very close to the head assembly. But if you lift it up from the back first, so it clears some of the switches and the push buttons, and you can move the plate down, it'll come right off. It takes a little patience to do that. You can figure it out if you jostle it around. Pick it up from the back first and sort of nudge it down, and then it'll pop right off. It takes a little practice. You have to reverse it to get it back in the opposite direction. And I can also see right off the bat, after opening it up, the belt is broken. I can see pieces of it laying down in here. I can see the belt obviously needs to be replaced. So I can see pieces of it laying down in the machine. Other than that, internally it's quite clean. Okay, now with the front panel open, we can inspect some of the internal issues. The other video I showed the belt had completely rotted away and broken and laying in the bottom of the transport. Now what we have is the pinch roller assembly is almost completely frozen. Here is the solenoid that pulls the assembly back and forth to engage. This is normally where the pinch roller, here's the capstan here, turns freely. This is where the pinch roller normally rests. The solenoid pulls this back and forth. Now you can see that this thing is completely tight. All the lubrication has turned to glue. Now I can see right now that the main pivot point appears to be right here. So what I'm afraid I'm going to have to do is remove the head stack, and by looking at the mounting points it looks like these 2 large screws here are what hold the head stack down. And I don't want to touch these other small screws. These are the actual screws that hold the heads in the assembly. I don't want to touch those. These are the 2 that I believe are holding down the head stack, so we'll take and have to remove those. To replace the belt is going to be interesting too, because there's a couple of hold down points here, and I believe there's going to be bolts or screws on the opposite side that'll have to be taken out. But the first thing I want to do is get this mechanism freed up. Well, to get at the main pivot points, or main mount points for the capstan bearing, the cast mechanism, there's 3 mounting points, at least 3, on this side. So to get at those, we have to remove this bottom cover. Earlier I mentioned that the left tension arm, tape tension arm, was completely frozen, and that was the case. Apparently the lubrication had failed and the tension arm was completely frozen on the post. This, once the front cover's off, this is the post that the tension arm assembly sits on, and here's the bearing. And to get this assembly off, there's a few small pieces, and of course the mounting stud for the tension arm is here, and that fits on the post that, or the bearing that I just showed you. To get that off, it was completely glued onto that bearing. What I did was take a 300 watt soldering iron and just for, I don't know, a minute or so laid the hot iron on the post itself and just waited and waited and waited. Probably about 30 seconds, I guess, somewhere in there. Maybe a minute. And eventually, after the glue or the solidified lubrication had softened, that assembly just pulls right off. And one thing you got to be careful though is that little spring here is under tension, and you got to watch to make sure that that doesn't go flying when you take the... Oh, you have to take this set screw out too before the assembly will pull off the post or the bearing. But that's the main device that sits on the bearing. So we'll have to clean that up and relubricate that bearing and put it back together. Once it comes time to reassemble the left tension arm, here are a couple pictures of the completed assembly, which includes the mounting bearing. And this will help when it comes time to reassemble this assembly. On that left tension arm bearing, you have to use a lot of patience and a lot of cleaning and a lot of scrubbing, both the inside of the post and on the bearing itself. Once you get that cleaned well, even without any lubrication, you have to get that down to the point where it'll turn freely on that on its bearing without even any new lubrication. Well, I removed the flywheel assembly. This is the bearing here that is totally frozen up, and that is the portion of the pinch roller actuator lever that is pulled in with the solenoid. Now I'm going to have to loosen that post out of that bearing. To say that it takes a little patience, it does, to get that assembly out of the machine. That's basically where the flywheel goes. Remove the head assembly. Don't disconnect wiring, of course, but just lay it off to the side. The main flywheel assembly is a casting that's held in with four screws. And then this assembly comes off. This is basically what you have to do if you have to replace the belt. Maybe not quite so much. You can probably sneak the belt in underneath a couple of the leg posts without taking the whole casting out. But it's exercise in patience to get that apart, and now to unfreeze this main bearing point. I'm going to try the old-fashioned way of clearing or loosening this bearing. I'm going to use a torch to heat this up and see if I can loosen up the lubrication in here. I hope this works. You're seeing this for the first time, but I'm going to try this and see what happens. How about that? It worked. That thing was lock solid in that bearing. But heated it up, cleared some of the, or loosened up lubrication that had completely turned to glue or concrete, and it came out. So, success on that anyway. And with the new drive belt, we can now get that capstan and flywheel. One thing I find handy to do when reconditioning equipment is to, when I start disassembling things, is not only to take pictures of a lot of the assemblies that you can reference when you start putting things back together, but also is to, when you take some of the small hardware apart, is put them in small pill bottles or old film canister bottles or whatever, with a little note as to where they were located in the assembly. And that makes it a lot easier when you start putting things back together, and you just separate them into each individual location as to where the hardware goes. And instead of just having a pile of screws somewhere and then having to guess afterwards where everything goes. At this point I've got the unit reassembled, have the new belt installed, of course have the head bracket reinstalled, and the capstan pinch roller and its pivot point are now free and moving, and also the left tension arm is now free and moving. So those are some of the major mechanical issues. Now I'll get the reel platters put on here, make sure the tape transport functions properly. Here's a little test set I'd like to use with any equipment that's been sitting around for a long period of time, many years. It's basically a AC lamp in series with the AC line cord going to the equipment. What this will do is if you turn the equipment on and there's any kind of a dead short in the equipment, it won't damage it, but basically it'll just light the light bulb, and the light bulb will limit the current. So we have this in series with the system now, and we'll give it a try here. And we see that the power light on the recorder comes up, so that's a good indication, and we get a dull glow in the lamp. So that is telling me there's no dead short, and we should be safe to put the full AC line on the equipment. Okay, after several hours of patient cleaning and belt replacement and hardware restoration and lubrication, we finally got this guy running really well. We can start off by just showing some of the mechanics. We won't go into the electronics right now, that'll be saved for another video here, but we'll just show that it is in good mechanical operation. Of course, we go into play. Let's play forward. Play reverse. Fast forward. Fast reverse. And you can actually go back and forth between fast forward and fast reverse without stopping. And these Teac decks are really handle the tape nicely once they're in good mechanical operation. Reset the counter. And auto reverse also. The machine does have auto reverse. It'll play the tape through, and once it senses a small metal or foil patch on the tape, it goes through the sensor, and the sensor will sense that. It'll stop and play in reverse. Well, I don't have the metal sensor, but I can fake it out by just tripping this sensor here, and it goes back into reverse. So mechanically it's in great shape. And now, in another video, we'll show the recording and electronic properties.